Hey guys, thanks very much for tuning in. God bless you guys. Thanks for watching my channel. You're about to watch my interview with Keith Foskey, but before we do, I just want to encourage you go check out his social media, I guess you could say, his YouTube channel, his TikTok, his Facebook, whatever. It's all under the name of Conversations with the Calvinist. It's hilarious, it's theologically sound, it's everything that you're looking for. So go ahead and go check that out. And now, on to the interview. Enjoy, guys. What's going on, everybody? I'm Jay, the Reformed Puerto Rican dude. Thank you so much for tuning in. Tonight, I've got with me the king of the Amillennials himself, Pastor Keith Foskey. How you doing today, Pastor Keith?
Hey, brother. How are you, Jay? It's good to see you.
Yes, sir. You as well. Thank you very much for joining me this evening. Um, I have been really excited about this conversation because you and Doug made me laugh a lot, but you made me think a lot too. And I'm not sure if you and I have discussed my particular position. I am post mill. I think we've had that conversation, but it's not something that I make a big deal out of. Sometimes, sometimes I do.
Depends on the
Um,
audience. Yeah.
exactly. Listen, eschatology matters, right? That's why you were on eschatology matters. So absolutely it matters. But if anybody is watching this and you're still kind of new to the whole eschatology thing, I do want to make this disclaimer. Um, Eschatology matters, absolutely. It is important, absolutely, but it should not divide us as brothers and sisters in Christ. Okay, and so please keep that in mind as you're going. If this is new to you and you're exploring, the different eschatological positions, you will find, unfortunately, sometimes very sadly, some Christians that probably put a little bit more importance on secondary things than they should. And I would say it's all about finding that balance. So I just want to put that out there. Actually, Keith, since we're on that, is there anything you want to add to that as well?
Yeah. I mean, I would even classify, if you think of the sort of three circles, the essentials and then the denominational distinctions and then the adiaphora, those things in which we can disagree on. I would even put eschatology in the third, in a tertiary category, in that there can be people within the same church who disagree. I mean, I've had elders that disagreed on the millennial position, and yet we served together well. So I agree. I would just go a step further and say it's I think of a secondary issue thing, something that might divide churches like baptism or something like
Hmm,
that. It's not
I
essential
see.
to the gospel, but it's still a denominational distinctive. This isn't even distinguished necessarily within denominations. This is,
Yep.
they're a Baptist pre-mill, post-mill, and on-mill. They're, along the line. So that, again, not to be corrected, but that was just a
Oh
thought I
no.
had. Yeah, is to say, don't let this. We've had people leave church over this, leave our church over this
Yeah.
issue. And if there's anything that I think you shouldn't leave the church over necessarily, unless the church is wildly, in one position so much that they call others heretics.
Yes.
If it's a position that's the only thing the church ever talks about is the rapture or something like that, that might be worth
Sure.
looking elsewhere. But
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely correct. Even my church, most of my actually all of my pastors are currently amillennial, and I think it's like me and my wife and maybe one other guy that are post millennial. So definitely, absolutely no reason to split over that. So that was very good. Absolutely. All right. So if you guys haven't figured it out yet, we are going to be talking about the debate that Keith had with Pastor Doug Wilson on eschatology. And if you don't know Pastor Doug Wilson, he is post millennial. Keith here is a millennial. Keith, why don't you tell us a little bit about how that debate came about? What were some of the things that you guys talked about beforehand? That kind of thing. I'll let you take it away.
well, the relationship between Doug Wilson and I sort of is, it all started as a joke because well, not quite a year ago now, I was at a conference with James White, and I dressed up as Doug Wilson and pretended to be him and took pictures with people. And I called myself the Harbor Freight Doug Wilson. And James White and I did a sweater vest dialogue where I was pretending to be Doug Wilson, and he called me Doug Wilson. So there was this sort of like funny thing. Everybody knows I do comedy. So this was a comedic, sort of jab at Doug Wilson. And that just sort of sat dormant for a while. Well, Eschatology Matters put out a poll. Who is your favorite Amillennialist? And they had Kim Riddlebarger. They had Dr. Groff. They had Dr. Storms. And they had me. And the first, when I saw my name on the list, I sent a message on Twitter. It was public. I said, I don't deserve to be on this list. I don't deserve to be with these guys. I'm not a millennial scholar by any stretch. The only reason I was on the list is I think I had been interviewed by them, and I had mentioned that I was an amillennialist, and that's part of the interview. That's the only reason. Well, when they put the post out and they asked for who was their favorite, I won by a landslide. It was like not even close. I got like 70% of the vote or something, which was stupid, ridiculous. And I even said, there's no way that I should have won this. I shouldn't even have been on the list. So I got a Burger King crown. I've actually got it right here. This is my crown. And I wore the Burger King crown and took a picture. My wife took a picture of me with it. And I had my kid's blanket. It was like a fleece blanket that looked like a cape. And so I posted that picture and I said, I'm now the king of the Amillennialists. And that took off. That like went all over and everybody was laughing about it. Well, about a week later, they posted, who's your favorite post-millennialist? And it was James White, Jeff Durbin, Doug Wilson, and someone else. Well, Doug Wilson won that one. So he became the prince of the post-millennialists, and I was the king of the amillennialists, and that's where the joke became. And I posted a video of myself in my crown challenging him to a debate, and I never thought anything would come of it. I thought it was just a big joke. I was like, if I'm the king of the amillennialists and you're the prince of the post-millennialists, then we need to debate. So I never thought anything would come of it. Well, the guys at Eschatology Matters, one of them, Tim Bushong, the pastor, he knows Doug Wilson personally. So he reached out to Doug Wilson and said, hey, this guy's, he made this joking video challenging you to a debate. Would you be willing to actually do a short, humorous debate? And I want to stress that. It was that he said a short, humorous debate. It was all intended to be funny. It wasn't intended to be a scholarly James White type debate.
Sure.
And he wrote back and he said, yeah, we can do 15 minutes. And that's the amount of time I had in my head was 15 minutes. And that's nowhere near a debate, but I make funny videos that are 10 to 15 minutes long. And that's what I was thinking, right? It was going to be a 15-minute debate, not debate, just a joking, trading jabs back and forth, that kind of thing. Well, I ended up having a conversation with Doug Wilson. We emailed back and forth a few times. He's very gracious. And the day of, he was willing to go longer than the originally agreed upon 15 minutes. And he was willing to do 30 minutes. So, and you'll notice in the video, I think you mentioned it pre-show, that there was a point at which Tim Bushong says, all right, we're at 30 minutes. Like that was the time that was given. So I understand Doug is a man who is immensely busy with 1,000 things, and he runs all of these different things, with Canon Press and all these different things. He's got his hand in 1,000 different projects. So the fact that he gave us 30 minutes was a blessing. But for anyone who would say, well, you didn't take it seriously, or you didn't, this wasn't a scholarly debate, or this wasn't, and this, you didn't get across your points or anything. Understand two things. One, I thought we had 15 minutes going in. And two, I never intended or thought that this was going to be an actual scholarly debate. So, and if that sounds like I'm being somewhat apologetic, I'm not. I'm just saying this going in was intended to be fun, and we had fun. He and I both laughed the whole time. And so I hope that people understand that sort of better now, maybe how it all played out.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, you had me and my wife laughing. So if no one else laughed, I can guarantee you, you did it for me and my wife. So thank you very much for that. We
Yeah,
had,
absolutely.
and we watched it. We actually watched it a second time because it was just that funny. So absolutely, I'm glad that you guys had fun with it. I do think that the debate had substance, though. It wasn't like it was just a one big joke. Like I think both of you guys did lay out your position and defended it rather well. You did kind of get to, respond. I think probably Pastor Doug got to respond a little bit more to you than you got to respond to him. That's a feeling I got. Did you get that feeling as well, or?
Yeah, I think that there was a sense in which they would there wasn't a lot of structure to it, and
Sure.
so Tim was doing the very best he could at just sort of pointing questions at both of us, and my for whatever reason, I ended up going first on both of the volleys, if you will. So I would volley something out there, and then Doug had the opportunity to hit it back at me, and I never really had the opportunity to respond because we went right to the next thing. And if you look at the structure of it, there was basically two volleys. There were two things that I sort of put out there. The first one, if I remember correctly, was the thing about the expectations, what we have different expectations, and the imminency of Christ's return, and he addressed that. And then I didn't get to respond to what he said because we moved on to this. And again, I'm not upset or anything, but that was what happened. Tim moved on to the next thing, and the next thing was when I brought up the wheat and the tares, and then he responded with what I think is probably, from his perspective, probably one of the best sound bites of the whole thing was when he said, "Yes, but it's a wheat field." I think that was a good response from his perspective, from the post-millennial. Well, it is a wheat field. That's a good statement, and that sort of sums up what he was trying to say in a very tight, nice position. So I was like, okay, that there was basically two volleys in that time, and I hit it over there. He hit it back, and then that was it. And there wasn't a back and forth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I'm so sorry. Yeah, absolutely. I did notice that, and I'll be honest with you. I called Tim and I told him, listen, don't let Keith respond. We need to make sure the Post Mills win this. I'm
Sure.
just kidding.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm just kidding. I could have done that. But I wanted to be fair.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you know Tim?
Not
Oh,
personally.
okay.
I mean, we're like Facebook friends.
Yeah, he's a great guy, very talented guy, super talented.
Yes, love his
Absolutely.
music. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I do have a couple of questions for you in regards to, kind of how you prepared and things like that. So when you were preparing for this debate, did you prepare by looking up post-millennialism on Wikipedia, or was that solely Pastor Doug that did that?
That's funny that you mentioned that, because that was he said that in the debate based on something I said prior to the recording. So you didn't get to hear my setup and his joke, because my setup was before we started recording, we had like a 5-minute interaction before, just like you and I were talking before we hit record. Like there was the pre-show, sort of get to know you moment. And he and I were getting to know each other, talking. And I said two things. I said, one, I did prepare for this. I said, because I don't want to look like a fool in front of my congregation. I do have a church that matters to me, and I don't want them to think their pastor's a fool, even though he dresses up like a Methodist and lisps. And even though I do make comedy, when it comes to theology, I'm very serious minded. And so I did try to prepare. And so when he said, I prepared too, I went to Wikipedia, he was actually poking me for that. And I thought that was funny. I wish people would have heard because it makes it even better with what he said about the Wikipedia part. And so there was that. And then there was, I said there were two things. I can't really, I kind of lost what the other one was, but that was the main thing, was when I said to him at the beginning, before we recorded, I said, I really did try to prepare so I don't look like a fool, because I didn't want to look like a fool.
So what you're saying is that you went to actual scholarly resources?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
for a okay. Well, I don't know who does that, but
Yeah.
hey, it's crazy enough to work. Who knows?
Sure. And I'll actually tell you a little bit about that. I actually have a wonderful email exchange with Kim Riddlebarger that he and I talked at length about my arguments and what they
Yeah.
were, what arguments I thought were good. I sent him I had an opportunity to send him an email. I outlined what I was going to say, and he wrote me back some very thoughtful and wise responses. So I was this whole thing has been like a dream come true. I got to talk with Kim Riddlebarger. I got to somewhat debate Doug Wilson. I got to hang out with the guys from Eschatology Matters. It was all just a blessing. So in that regard, but yeah, no, I did really. I read several books. I listened to several sermons in preparation, just so that I wouldn't get knocked on my heels if a question came my way.
Absolutely. No, and praise God. That's awesome. I mean, it sounds like you had a really blessed experience, which amazing. You got to speak with Dr. Riddlebarger, which, obviously I'm post mill, so I don't necessarily line up with everything that he says, but even his book on amillennialism has been well, it's not his only book, but his most well known book, which I have it right here. The case for amillennialism. I have found that book to be tremendously helpful, and it's like you guys were mentioning in the debate itself. There's a lot more that we're going to agree here that we're going to disagree on. So definitely has been a blessing. Now, I did want to know. I'm a little concerned. I've been hearing some people bring up some concerns. So maybe we can clear the air on this. Are we post millennials to expect an invasion of our kingdom by the king of the amillennialists, or will our differences be settled in a duel between two selected champions?
Well, I always prefer the duel. I think that's the most noble of battles. You ever see the movie Robot Jocks?
I haven't.
Probably not. That's an 80s classic. And
Yes, sir.
it was how in the future nations would no longer fight. They had these two massive robots that would fight each other, and they had
Okay.
their greatest warrior would fight within the robot, and that was how all national disputes were settled. So the amillennialist and postmillennialist dispute will be a Robot Jock style joust, which will happen on the bow of Kenham's Ark. And that's where I put everything, is on the bow of Kenham's Ark. So
Oh, beautiful. I think actually, yes. Was that part of you? Did you mention that during your challenge video?
I did. I said I made three decrees. I decreed that post mill would be called Fancy Mill. I decreed that that all dispensationalists would have to choose a champion to joust for my pleasure once every 7 years until Jesus comes, and then I decreed the debate with Doug Wilson. So.
Okay, fair enough. Well, let me ask you a question. If you couldn't just choose a robot as your champion, as king of the amillennials, who would you pick as your champion, and why?
To debate, if there was going to be a real scholarly debate and I wanted to put someone up.
I'm talking about a legit duel between two people.
Oh, a duel. Wow. Okay.
Or maybe a debate.
Okay.
But it'll be so intense that it looks like a duel.
Well, if it were a debate, I would either put Dr. Riddlebarger or one of the other two gentlemen who were on that list with me that I shouldn't have been on. And all three of them were gracious, because I did reach out to all three of them in preparation for the debate, because again, I wasn't supposed to be on the list to begin with, or shouldn't have been. So any one of those men would stand firm and stand well in a theological debate. However, if it was fisticuffs, I'm gonna choose myself, man. I get out there with my karate and throw down.
Oh boy. So are you like a black belt, or?
Oh, you didn't know? Yeah, I've next year I'll celebrate my 30th year as a martial artist. I have a 5th degree black belt in Shotokan.
Oh my goodness.
And I have a 2nd degree black belt in modern arnis, which is Filipino stick and knife fighting.
Oh,
and
boy.
I also teach for the NRA. I teach concealed weapon classes, personal protection classes inside and outside the home, which are using firearms for personal protection. And I'm certified with Sabre International, which is a pepper spray company. I've spent many years training self-defense, personal protection, and teaching people. I even have a group called Kodiak Life Protection, which is my own group where I certify instructors. So I've been doing this for a long time.
Keith, remind me never to get on your bad side. Okay? I got to make sure I never do that. Listen, you are millennials. Between you and Vodi Bakum, You know, because
Yeah.
he's a
Well,
martial artist as
I
well.
forgot about, you know what? I wish I would have said that. Vody can, I have a picture of Vody and I he has me in a headlock, and it's one of my favorite pictures in the world. And I would definitely choose him to fight. He's a better fighter than me.
Ah, well, there you go. Well, actually, see, this is the problem. You guys, you got a deep bench here because I'm trying to think of one post millennial I could throw down, and I'm like, well,
Well, Jeff Durbin.
actually, Jeff Durbin. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Jeff Durbin.
There you go.
But let's say Jeff, falls. Who do we send in? I don't know. I'm gonna have to think about that one.
I still feel like James White could scrap. I don't know. He does all that exercising, riding the bike and rowing and all that stuff. I think
he's always talking about how he's old. He's been saying he's old for 20 years.
His beard is a little white, but I still think, he drives a giant diesel truck all around the world, pulling that fifth wheel. He's got to get out there and, put down the landing gear and everything. He could throw down if he had to.
I saw him at a conference in Texas, and it was a small conference. So we're all sharing the same parking lot. And when I see him drive out with that four-wheeler and just a giant sign in the back of his truck that says, it's either Christ or chaos.
Yeah.
And I'd rather choose Christ or something like that. It's just so funny that he is just on the road all the time like that. Just on his giant four-wheeler doing the dividing line on the road. That's amazing. Yes, sir. All right. So, the debate, so-called debate was very cordial. But obviously, like I said, there was some depth to it. So what would you say was Pastor Doug's most challenging argument that if you had to address, you might have a hard time with it?
Yeah. Well, that's kind of a hard question. I'm thinking back through everything. Because obviously he's a very intelligent man. Obviously he's a very learned man. And he has thought through a lot of these things and probably for a lot longer time than I have, in the sense of he's been in ministry since I was born. So, he said that he'd been, I'm 40 years old. He's been in ministry for 40 years. So there's certainly, something to consider there, but the arguments, I'm trying to think of what his arguments were. Like when I challenged him on the imminency of Christ's return, his answer was, well, he doesn't think Christ is going to return soon. However, if he does, that'll just be good. It'd be like, I'll praise the Lord. What did he say? I'll change my eschatology in the air was like the thing. Cause somebody told me, one person on Twitter or somewhere said, well, you lost the debate when you said that if the whole government changed to Christian, that you would become post-mill. And I said, well, why didn't Doug Wilson lose the debate when he said if he was raptured, he would change his theology? I think any one of us would say that that none of us have a perfect eschatology, and therefore, if there are things that could certainly affect our eschatology. And in fact, I would ask you this, Jay, and I don't know this. Have you always been post-mill?
No, I haven't.
Yeah. So something happened, whether it was a better understanding of Scripture or whether it was someone gave a convincing argument that changed your mind. You have become post-millennialist as a result of a process. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's fair to say any of us are in a process, and I'm not saying I would never be post-mill, but and someone heard my sermon recently. I preached a sermon where I mentioned being amillennial, and they said that sounds like post-millennialism to me, because the sermon was yeah.
Let me tell you something. I heard that clip. It wasn't. I didn't hear the whole sermon, but it was like a 3-minute clip, I think it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you know what? I will tell you this. I don't normally jump in too much when I'm interviewing somebody, but I just want to say this one thing. Recently, I think it was in May. Oh my goodness. There was somebody in Ligonier that passed away, like 2 months after Ligonier, and I forget his name, and I met him, and now I'm blanking out on his name. Oh my goodness. Do you happen to remember who I'm referring
I
to?
unfortunately I don't. No, I can't
Oh
think of
my
who it is.
goodness. Oh my goodness. Hang on. Well, you know what? While I think of it, why don't I ask you the next question? Because this is actually a pretty important question that you did bring up in the debate. So you described yourself as an optimistic amillennialist.
Yes.
Um, there's a lot of questions still that I've seen a lot of people asking. Well, what's the difference, right? So can you explain the difference between classic amillennial? I don't know if classic is the right term, but let's just say amillennial and optimistic amillennial. And could you also explain why optimistic amillennialism isn't post-millennialism?
Well, I this is where I think nomenclature is very important and also distinct over the last 100 years, because 100 years ago, I think we would be called postmillennial. Where the distinction lies is the understanding of the expectations sort of changing, because we are all post millennial. You and I both are post millennial in the sense that we both believe that Christ will come back at the end of the millennium. We just happen to believe, when I say we, amillennialists just happen to believe that this millennial period that began with the resurrection and ascension of Christ and will end with his return, that this time will not necessarily end up with Christ's uh, uh, the entire earth being, as it were, uh, subject to Christ in a wholesale manner, where the post millennialists would say that the world, that Christ will return to a saved world, where the amillennialists would say Christ returns to save the world. And so that's a real
Mm.
big distinction. That's a distinction that Dr. Riddlebarger makes in his book, and he would say that's really where the distinction lies. It's not in the sense that we're in the millennium. Doug believes we're in the millennium. I believe we're in the millennium. I think you do,
Yes.
unless I misunderstand. So we believe we're in the millennium. So I would ask this, and maybe you could answer this because I didn't get to ask Doug this. Do you believe we've been in the millennium since Christ ascended, or do you believe that it started at some point?
Man, you know what's funny about you asking that question? Um, my wife and I were having a discussion on that with a church member,
Hmm.
a fellow church member, and he's very staunchly amillennial, but he wants to understand the postmillennial view. Um, what I told him was, listen, the millennium began somewhere between Christ's death and resurrection and 70 AD. I'm not sure. It's something that I haven't, I still haven't worked all the way through that as of yet, to be honest with you.
Okay, but
Um,
you would put 70 AD in there as a post. I mean, I'm a partial preterist myself, so I do as well, but I maybe see it slightly different in the sense that you would say that's potentially the start of the millennium. Otherwise,
could be. I'm not entirely convinced,
okay.
um, but it
And that
could
and
be.
I don't want to nail you down. I'm just that's where I was saying, some people, some post millennialists believe there's the millennium is still coming. That there's this idea that
Yes.
there's a golden age that's coming, and that it's going to be a Christianization of the world, and
Yeah.
that's the 1,000 years. But that doesn't seem to be the position of you or Doug. You.
Well, can you clarify something for me? Because as I understand it, that view was very popular among the postmillennial Puritans.
Mhm.
Um, I haven't seen much of it nowadays. I mean,
No,
I'm not
no,
saying it can't
I would
exist.
agree. So this is where I say it's fancy amillennialism. This is where I say I think we're we're both in the same, when we talk about the nature of the millennium being the time between Christ's first and second advent, right? The
Hmm.
interadvental period, which I mentioned in my sermon, that we both believe that. We both believe that the millennium is not 1,000 years, obviously, because it's been more than 1,000 years since Christ's first advent, and he hasn't returned yet. So we don't believe it's 1,000 years. So the nature and extent of the millennium are the same. Where the distinction lies is, what do we think is going to happen before Christ returns?
Right.
Do we
Right.
believe, And here's a big one. And we talk about optimistic amillennialism. I believe the gospel is going to continue to succeed throughout the world, and there are going to be people who are continue to be saved. But I also believe, and this is what I didn't really get to flesh out with Doug, I also believe there's going to be a continued hatred and growth in the opposition to the gospel that will continue as well. And therefore, there won't be a time, but before Christ returns, in my opinion, I don't believe there's going to be a time where there's going to be an overtaking of evil. But as with the wheat and the tares, they're going to grow together, even though it is a wheat field.
Right.
And I agree with Doug's position. I think, as I said, I think that was his strongest soundbite. But even though it's a wheat field, there's still going to be this evil that grows. And will there come a time where, if we understand Satan's releasing to be a future event, is there going to be a time where there's actually going to be a striking at the church prior to Christ's return, a striking out of what some might call a tribulation period, or a time of severity, a time of persecution that is going to come prior to Christ? And that's why I say coming to save the world, as Dr. Riddleberger says, versus coming to a saved world, right? So that's where, even though I'm optimistic that the gospel is going to continue to grow as the mustard seed is going to flourish throughout the world and is going to grow, and birds are going to come and nest in its branches, I still also see the growth of the evil, and the evil one is going to have his day possibly one day. And in that, there may be a time where the church suffers even more than it suffers now. And so I'm optimistic, but I'm not post-millennial. And again, with post-millennialism, and I don't know where you are on this, but you also get into things like Reconstructionism, theonomic understandings, and even ideas of, the big argument right now is Christian nationalism, right? All those things. That was there was somebody on Twitter who was really upset that I didn't get into those things. Mm-hmm. But again, time did not allow to dive into theonomy and Reconstructionism and Christian nationalism. So.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah. Listen, you're going to find this really weird, or maybe you won't, but I think it's weird. And I'm speaking about myself. I don't know if I would own the term Reconstructionist. I agree with some Reconstructionist arguments, but I don't know if I'm willing to take on that label. Yet, I am willing to take on the Christian nationalist label. And I know most people aren't, and that's okay. I'm not, there are some Christian nationalists. There's different flavors of Christian nationalism out there. There are some that are straight up kinist, and actually address that in one of my videos. Yeah. And, I don't, there are some Christian nationalists that aren't necessarily kinist, but they say there are no kinists in Christian nationalism. I'm like, no, that's nonsense. There are. Let's not, we don't have to pretend it's there. We just say, I'm not affiliated with that man.
Sure.
I'm not.
And I'm not allergic to Christian nationalism, as some guys are. Some people think it's the most dangerous thing right now. I don't have an allergy to it. I just don't, I could honestly say, even though I hosted a debate with Joel Webbin on my show about it, with him and another young man, I can still say I'm at a point where I'm not even sure where the rules are and where the stakes are claimed. I just know there's so many people mad about it. I'm just like, I'm not mad about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's different flavors. I'm not trying to get into that too much, but I'll put this out there. It's not the term that I would have chosen. Sure. But it's kind of like, actually, I think, speaking of Joel Webbin, I think he has said this, that he has said, the Puritans, for example, they didn't name themselves Puritan. There's been cases throughout history where a group becomes the derogatory terms that initially is used.
He said that on my show. Yeah, he said this is a label that has been given to us. Yeah.
Okay, so I would approach that Christian nationalist label a little bit more in that sense, in the general sense of, I generally want a Christianized culture, right, where it leans favorably towards Christianity, and I want people to be Christians, that I want that for my nation. So yeah, absolutely, put it on me. I'll wear it on a shirt. But there are different flavors, and I think that's where a lot of people get angry, and they get exposed to a particular brand, and they say, oh, so that's how they all are. And it's like, well, you can't really do that, because Imagine if somebody did that to you for being, Baptist, and then some crazy Baptist over here says something, and then you say, wait a minute, that's not me, So like, anyway, I'm not trying to get into that. By the way, I did remember, I was about to look it up, and I remembered Harry Reeder.
Okay.
You mentioned that that 3-minute clip. I agree. It sounded post millennial that you did. I felt the same way when I heard Harry Reeder at Ligonier preach on, I think it was working for the glory of God. I think that was his theme. And we by God's grace, we got to meet him. He actually ended up going to a church where we live down here in Miami the very next Sunday. So we spoke to him for a couple hours at Ligonier and got to go hear him preach again down here, which happened to be a friend of mine's church, who he is a pastor at that church, because Harry Reeder used to be the pastor of that church. God's providence. Anyway, all of this to say, when I approached him and we were talking for a while, I said, let me ask you a question. Are you post-millennial? And he said, no, I'm optimistic amillennial. I said, wow, you sound like a post-millennial. But, sadly for us, he went to be with the Lord 2 months after that. But he is in glory, praise God. Now, I did want to clarify one thing. I don't know if I caught you making that distinction between optimistic amillennialism and, I guess, pessimistic or neutral amillennialism. Did you address that already? Or I'm not sure if I caught it.
I didn't really get that far. As I was explaining, as I said, if you go 100 years ago, there was really not a big distinction between you had post mill and pre mill, and this idea of amillennialism is a distinguishing now between the expectations of what's going to happen. And like we talked about, Reconstructionism, theonomy, things like that. Are those things going to have, are those things going to encompass? Are those things going to take over? But within amillennialism, those who would say that the world is going to get worse as we see Christ returning might be called pessimistic. More pessimistic, and there are a lot who would say. I mean, I think even Dr. Storms, and I don't want to misrepresent him. So if I
Sure.
say anything that's incorrect, I would encourage anyone who has an opportunity to correct me in the comments, please do. But I think Dr. Storms would look forward to more of a turning away from the gospel, a sort of a traditional tribulational time, not a dispensational, raptured type thing, but the idea that there's going to be a falling away, a turning away, so sort of seeing Paul's words there in the epistles about, the end and this great turning away as something that's going to happen prior to the end. And therefore some might call that a pessimistic view of amillennialism, where others, maybe like myself, would say, even though that could happen, there is still going to be growth and gospel success all around the world until Christ comes. And that's where I think the divide between, more of an optimistic versus pessimistic. I think even though there's going to be enemies rise up against the church, and I do believe that, I believe the church will meet those enemies, and the gates of hell will not prevail against Christ's church. So I think
Amen.
I think the battle will rage. I think the church will succeed. I think there will be points of places where it looks like there's failure, like currently in the United States. It looks like there's a lot of failure because there's so much nonsense going on in the name of Christ, and Barbie sermons and zip lines and things like that, and all kinds of nonsense that are happening. But if we look at other places around the world where the church is persecuted, the church flourishes. And the old saying, the ancient saying of the church, is that the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. And so if the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church, then we can continue to be persecuted while we continue to see success at the same time. So it's optimistic in that there's still going to be gospel success even in the midst of suffering.
Amen. As a post-mill, I can say amen to that, by the way.
Sure.
Which just, I just want to say one thing. You're partial preterist. You're optimistic, Amil. You're so close.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
We,
Yeah.
we,
Yeah.
al- we
Yeah.
always got you there.
Well, as Doug, graciously, welcomed me in as an honorary, and I love the fact that he called me Grumpy Post Mill. And so I say now the battle is not Post Mill versus Mill, it's Fancy Mill versus Grumpy Post Mill. And so I'm going to get a shirt that says Grumpy Post Mill. I'm supposed to be going to Fight Laugh Feast that they're having up in Kentucky. And if I do get to go, I'm going to get a shirt. Are you going?
I'm not gonna get to go, but I have their shirt, Rowdy Post Mill.
So. Nice. Well, I want to get one that says Grumpy Post Mill. Yeah.
Yeah, that's hilarious, man. This has nothing to do with this conversation. How do you come up with so much hilarious material? I need to know.
I have loved comedy forever. I'll be honest. This is kind of funny. It's funny you should ask this because I've been thinking about doing a show about the day Robin Williams died.
Oh,
I remember where I was when Robin Williams died. I know a lot of like my dad's generation. Everybody remembers where they were when JFK died, right? And my generation, we talk about 9/11. We all know where we were on 9/11.
Yeah.
Well, I know where I was when Robin Williams died. Robin Williams was a comedian, obviously not a Christian comedian, not somebody who usually Christian comedians even talk about. But the point is, I grew up in a situation where comedy had a huge part of my life. I watched movies that were comedy movies. I listened to comedians. It was just a big part of who I am, and I've always loved to laugh. And one of the men in my life who had a huge influence was a man by the name of Dennis Swanberg, who was a Christian comedian in the 70s and 80s. And when I was a teenager, I got his tapes and listened to his tapes. Well, maybe early 20s, I got his tapes, listened to his tapes. And he was just so good at telling stories. And he called himself, this is a line that I'm really hoping to adopt. He called himself a minister of encouragement. He said, I am your minister of encouragement. I'm just going to tell you stories that make you laugh. And he would go to churches and spend the evening telling these funny stories about his youth. And it really did resonate with me because he always shared the gospel. He was a great gospel entertainer, but he was an entertainer, sort of like, Tim Hawkins is a what I would say is a gospel entertainer, right? As somebody who does that. So when you ask, how do I come up with funny stuff? It's just years and years and years of hearing things that are funny and knowing what makes people laugh. Mm-hmm. And so now, it was a year ago that I made my first denominations video, and it was a goof. My wife had the idea. She said, "Hey, what if all the denominations had a conversation?" And I said, "Well, what if I played the part of all the denominations?" And so I dressed up like all these people, and it was because of that started. It took off, and now I think we're at 23 denominational meetings, and they all have done really well on YouTube and TikTok. So it just, and by the way, I don't have to write material. I just have to look it up because there's churches that do everything I've said. Everything, all of the Big Eva stuff, driving the motorcycle onto the, stage or whatever. It's just an exaggerated reality. That's all. Okay. That's all comedy is. Comedy is the best comedians just point out the real. Seinfeld,
that's true.
Was always just, you ever notice, that was just, what's the deal with, and then whatever, so it's just pointing out the stuff.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic the way that you do it. I mean, to this day, my wife still watches your denominational airlines videos, and I have to watch it along with her because it's like there's the point when you say that because the pilot, this is for the dispensational denomination, I believe you said
the co-pilot's unsaved in case the rapture happens. Yeah.
I couldn't breathe the first time I heard it. Yeah. That was so funny. You know what? I'm so sorry for derailing this conversation.
No. It's funny because I was interviewed earlier this week by Michelle Leslie. She's such a sweetheart and she's such a nice lady. And it was on this subject. So it's funny if people hear this interview and hear that interview, both of them, I mentioned the Dennis Swanberg thing. So it's funny you should ask. It was on my mind. Yeah.
Yeah. No, praise God. I mean, you obviously have a gift, whether you learned it by just observing or because it's just in you.
Yeah.
Do it for the glory of God. Absolutely. So I think that's great. Let's bring it back to eschatology here for a second. So, we've been talking about how you're not that different from postmillennialism in some sense. You're partial preterist, you're optimistic all. So, has there ever been any point in your life where you have really considered, maybe I am post mill? Um, if yes, what was that like for you? And if not, then why not? What made you stop?
I think what makes me stop is again, sort of going back a little bit in the conversation where I said that I truly don't see a wholesale change in the heart of man. And not that God can't change the heart of man, but that's not the picture I see in scripture, where we are told that the way is narrow that leads to life and the way is broad which leads to destruction. And so the idea that there's going to be more people in the world who are promoting Christ than who are opposing Christ is really hard for me to get past
Mm,
from an exegetical perspective, looking at it from the idea of that. And I do believe that Christians will suffer for Christ. There are so many
sure.
passages. I mentioned one in the debate, and I don't think Doug's response understood what I was saying, because I said we're going to suffer. I referenced Romans 8, and he said, well, of course we're going to suffer. Everybody suffers, and he talked about general suffering. But I was referring to the fact that we are going to suffer for the sake of the gospel.
Sure.
And I think that is a promise for all believers, that we all in one way or another will suffer for the sake of the gospel. And if the full on postmillennial position is true, and that is that there is coming a golden age, and I know that's not the term you guys like, so I'm not trying to be,
It's okay.
I'm not, yeah.
This doesn't offend me.
Okay, yeah, but if the idea is there's a golden age coming where Christ will rule in the hearts of men on this earth prior to his return, will there be a legitimate suffering for Christ among those men? And so that would be an issue that I would raise, and not that they won't suffer, because we'll all suffer. We're all going to suffer death. We're all going to suffer the
Sure.
loss of our
Yeah.
families, and everyone's going to suffer, but specifically suffering on behalf of the cross. And it almost comes to me in a sense similar to the position of the dispensationalists, who believe they're going to be raptured out before the great suffering occurs, because God's not going to let them suffer. And I say, but wait a minute, God's let his people suffer for 2,000 years, and you're special. You're not going to suffer. But God, right now there's Christian suffering in China and in Iraq and Middle East and different places, but you somehow are going to get to avoid the suffering. That would be one of the places that I would probably say I have a hard time with that.
Gotcha.
Do I believe that Christ is going to change men's hearts? Yes. And do I believe that there's going to be a revival? And that's what some people call revivalistic amillennialism. I think that's possible, that more and more people are going to be saved, but that it's going to encompass the globe, and that there's not going to be a sizable, and might I say even majorative position that is going to oppose Christ. That's where I would say.
Gotcha. Yeah. So just to be clear, you haven't really ever considered possibly switching over to postmillennialism. It's
Well,
never
I think,
something that.
well, like I said, that's what keeps me from it. It's not that I haven't considered it. I had a funny situation with when Jeff Durbin went on Ali Beth Stuckey and explained his position on postmillennialism. This was a couple of years ago. My wife heard it, and she was very interested in postmillennialism. So I sat down with her and explained, similar to what I just explained to you, that while I appreciate Jeff's arguments and I share many of his conclusions. I can't share the ultimate conclusion. I can look with optimism as to what the gospel is doing, and I don't have the idea that we're just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, which is sort of the some would say is the premillennial position that why bother, because we're just it's all going to hell in a handbasket anyway.
Yeah.
So I don't have that negative view. But I do think that the evil will continue, and there will continue to be a battle to fight until Christ returns.
I can definitely sympathize with what you're saying, because that was what actually kept me from going post mill for a long time. I haven't shared this with everyone I know, but some people do know. My wife went post mill before I did, and so it's one of those rare moments, because usually in most positions we share pretty much every position, thank God, which I know that's not the case for everybody, but it's helped with having peace in the home.
Well, some guys would say, don't let her read any books or listen to any podcasts. Because
oh no. Yeah, I know what you're talking about, but no. I mean, I know who you're referring to, and
I know there was Joel and I are friends. So if that's what you're thinking about, Joel Webbin, I know what he meant, and there's a whole debate about whether or not he was right or wrong. But I would, if anybody thinks Joel and I are cool, I'm poking fun. I poke at him. I say he looks like Dr. Claw, because if you've ever seen his podcast studio, he looks like every evil villain, and so he's cool. We're cool.
He's just missing the cat.
Oh yeah, absolutely. If he were stroking a bald cat, he would be Dr. Evil. Absolutely.
That's so funny. Well, so I think that this is how I feel about. I understood, right, when he clarified. I understood what he meant. I had a bit of a cringe moment where I was like, because I would consider myself even biblically patriarchal, right? Like I would agree with that.
Yeah, again, I'm not allergic to it. Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know if I completely go the way that he does. But I do definitely appreciate a lot of what Joel Webbin has been saying and doing as of late. So absolutely, I forgot what I was going to say.
Well, let me say something real quick. I'm friends with Joel Webbin and Nathaniel Jolly, so I just sort of just am friends with everybody. So I and I said that on I've got a show coming out next week where I interviewed David Morrill from Protestia. Do you know those guys?
I don't.
It's a discernment ministry. They're great guys.
Okay.
But I mentioned that to him. I said I try to be friends with everybody if I can. If I don't have to draw a line, I don't draw it.
I really, really appreciate that about you. Because if I'm being completely honest, okay, Keith, and I'll just put it out there. It's okay. I hate seeing what this whole G3 Nathaniel Jolly Christian nationalism, like I hate it. I can't stand it. I had a bit of a conversation with Virgil Walker some time ago, but I'm not gonna get into that. But let's just put it this way. I think that it really doesn't have to be. The things that are going on lately, it doesn't need to be this way. I mean, there can be moments where we disagree or agree to disagree, excuse me. Anyway, but let's keep praying for that. And if you are friends with both Nathaniel and Joel, listen, if there's anything you can do to bring those two together.
Well, hey, last time I checked, I was friends with both of them. If either one of them written me off, there was a time where Nathaniel and I were talking about him doing a denominational video with me. We were going to do the denominations go before a pulpit committee, and he was going to be the pulpit committee, and I was going to be answering his questions as the different denominations. That may still happen if we can make that. So like I'm saying, he and I have known each other. He's been on my show. Joe's been on my show. I don't consider either one of them as men that I don't respect. I respect both of them, and I think both of them have things that they're right about. I think both of them have things that I would disagree with them on, and that's easy enough to say.
Absolutely. Yeah. If it were that simple with everyone, that's
exactly.
Amazing.
Yeah.
All right. So I want to start wrapping it up here. I know we're coming up in an hour. So what would you say are some of the weaker arguments of postmillennialism and maybe some of the stronger ones?
I would say that both of it comes down to exegetical. I would say the postmillennialist focuses on the success passages and tend to reinterpret the other, what I would say, and I don't want to say the failure passages, because that's not that's not the opposite of success in this sense. They're what I would say maybe the suffering passages, and they tend to look at those passages in light of the success passages. So Doug mentioned the Ezekiel passage with the water going out into all the earth, and he said, well, it's a wheat field, and so therefore the earth is wheat, and so he's and I mentioned in my sermon where everybody said I was post mill, I said that the mustard seed goes into the ground and grows into a tree large enough to inhabit birds. Birds can nest in its branches. Therefore, the gospel is going out and is expanding. Those are the passages that I would say are positive for the post mill side. Where I would say the issue is to balance those with passages that speak specifically of the Christians' suffering, speak specifically of the battles that will continue to go on. And I would still ask how the postmillennial, and maybe you could answer this for the audience, how the postmillennialist understands the releasing of Satan at the end of the millennium. Is it only for the immediate destruction, or will there be a season of embattled rebellion prior to the return of Christ? And so those would be some of the areas I would want to focus on and say, yes, I agree with all the success passages, but I think there has to be balance. And here's where we talk about in our church, we talk about the two ditches. Like, for instance, on so many things, there are, it's like legalism and licentiousness. Both are two ditches, right? The truth is neither of those. The truth is something else.
Absolutely.
But you've got legalism, which has hold in so many churches, and you have licentiousness that has hold in so many churches. And it's not either or, because there's a right way, and it's neither of those. Well, the same thing I think happens with this is you get those who are, rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic doesn't do anything, therefore we shouldn't do anything. And there's that pessimistic, fatalist, view. And then there's this incurable optimism that there's going to come a time where the battle is won and there's no longer a battle to fight. And I don't see that either. So I think.
Yeah. No, I definitely, like I said, I've struggled for a long time to become post-millennial. One of my pastors actually told me, he said, I want to live like a post-millennial and prepare like a pre-millennial.
Okay.
And he said, and that's why I'm amillennial. I was like, okay, that's fine. One of the things that I worked through, and you keep bringing up the issue of suffering, and I agree that I think that was one of my biggest hangups before I fully became post-millennial. But I was able to work through that and still end up with a post-millennial eschatology. And I'm not saying this to be like, Keith, how dare you?
No, yeah. You get where I'm at, and
yeah, absolutely, yeah. I would say, as a post-millennial, I would say that either for the great majority of the history of time, or for the history of time until Jesus returns, for all of history until Jesus returns, I should say, I do believe that we are going to suffer not merely diseases, not merely old age, not merely any of those things, for the cross. Because until Christ returns, I do believe that we're still going to be preaching the gospel. And as a result, even if the majority of the world is Christianized, let's say it is, I do believe that there will always be that significant pushback, even if it's a minority. And it will be a significant enough a minority that will have to suffer. Now, does that mean that we'll suffer as much as, say, people in the first century, Christians in the first century? Well, I hope that we're not going to be thrown into the lion's pit, or
sure.
burnt alive too.
And as I said, I don't mean to interrupt you, but as I said, suffering is relative, because there are people who are suffering now in a similar way that first century Christians did. And we're not. You and I are sitting in air conditioned rooms talking on StreamYard. We're in we both have wives in the house that are, we're fixing to go lay down and be comfortable, where Christians around the world aren't, we're not suffering like they are. So
Mhm.
suffering is relative in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah, for you guys brought it up, right? Like, I think it was Pastor Doug, first world problems, right? Like,
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
it's
Yeah.
it's true. Yeah. So, well, okay. So we're gonna go ahead and wrap it up here, but I do have one more question for you. So I actually, not really a question; it's a proposition that I have for you. Okay. So if I could reach out to President Biden and get him to both repent and believe in Christ and become post millennial, will you agree to leave grumpy post mill behind and join the Federation of Post Mill Kingdoms?
No, but if you, as I said with Doug, we don't have a monarchy where one man would be able to change the entire government. But if all 50 senators, or how not, we have 50. What do we have? Yeah,
100 and
two senators per state, right? Or maybe I'm wrong.
right. But I
Yeah.
think we
So
might have a little bit. I think Puerto Rico. Hey, Puerto Rico.
yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
we got an senator or two.
If every senator were to bow the knee to Christ, they wouldn't even have to become post mill. If every senator bow the knee to Christ, I would begin to perhaps readjust my expectations.
Okay, fair enough. All right, Keith. Well, thank you very much. Before we go, is there anything else that you want to add before we wrap it up here?
Just that I appreciate our friendship, and most people probably don't know this. We share the a relationship, being part of a network together, and so people may not know, because we don't see each other much, but I do see you online, and I appreciate what you do, and I see a lot of your stuff, and you're friends with Jake, and you guys do stuff together, so that's cool, and I'm really just appreciate what you do. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. The feelings mutual, and I think I'm honored that you have time for the little people. You, oh king of the Amillennials.
Uh, well, yeah.
No, but I truly no. All kidding aside, I really do appreciate everything that you do. You make me laugh. You make me think. And you point me to Christ.
Amen.
What else more can I ask for? So, thank you very much, guys. For anybody that's watching, let us know what you think in the comments. I'll go ahead and reach out to Keith and tell him to check it out, good and bad. We can always engage with that sometimes. And if you did like the video, go ahead and give it a like. Until next time, God bless you guys. Take care.